Well, just next door to the Angels are the Anaheim Ducks, and their ownership group seems to be a perfect example of how you work with the city. Very different than how Artie and his team have conducted themselves. We'll explain all of that. And Angel Stadium needs a little love, but they're asking the question, who's responsible for that TLC? And will the lawsuit that's facing the Angels cause potential new ownership to walk away or at least be hesitant? Let's find out together. You're Locked On with Mike and John, and this is Locked On Angels.
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And John and I thank you for making Locked On Angels your first listen today. Every show is free and available on all platforms like Apple Podcast and Spotify. And one of the best ways that you can help out the show is by giving us a rate and a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can help the show out with a like, a comment, a subscription, and clicking the bell to be notified every time a new episode drops. And today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts.
We're so glad you decided to join us for this edition of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch Brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
Well, Mike, we're taking some time on a Friday to talk about all of the issues that are facing the Angels and mostly the ownership and what that might mean for the future ownership. And we've seen some stories come out recently about some trouble between the city of Anaheim and our Los Angeles Angels. And about a month ago, it was announced that the city of Anaheim passed a resolution to move forward with the OC Vibe. Vibe is going to be a huge development that's going to take place around the Honda Center. It sounds awesome, and I think it's going to be a great destination spot. But let's get into some of the details about OC Vibe and what it might mean for the Angels versus how the ownership of the Anaheim Ducks, the Samuelis, are handling their relationship with the city of Anaheim. So let me read this. This comes from the voiceofoc.org. A little bit of information about the OC Vibe is a $4 billion sustainable mixed-use live entertainment district, 95 acres, anchored by the Honda Center. And it's consistent with the city of Anaheim's vision for the Platinum Triangle. Now, if you don't know, that's the 820 acres around Angel Stadium, Honda Center, right there all along the 57. Listen to this, a 5,700 capacity concert venue, 1,500 residential units, including a commitment to 15% affordable housing, 10,000 new construction jobs, 3,000 permanent jobs once OC Vibe is completed, 2 hotels, 550 rooms, thematically aligned with the energy of the district, 5-acre riverfront park, outdoor amphitheater, the ability to host seasonal outdoor concerts and events. So it's going to be pretty cool. And there's office space. There's going to be restaurants, of course. So a long-term plan to bring in revenue to the city of Anaheim. The Samuelis are helping to fund this. They're using money from the Honda Center to pay off the debts that will be incurred in order to make this happen. But listen to this. This comes from voiceofoc.org. At Tuesday's meeting, city officials repeatedly said the taxable lease revenue bonds pose no threat to the city's general fund, and the Samuelis, the owner of the Ducks, will be responsible for paying down the debt with the Honda Center revenue. The bonds also delay the city from getting its share of the revenue because the money generated there is slated to pay down the $400 million in bonds. So they're going to pay it back, and then it will start generating revenue. But here's the key that I want to get to in how the Ducks handle the interaction with the city better than the Angels have had in the past. The lease agreement, overhauled in 2018, extends the Anaheim Ducks lease to 2053, so they will be Ducks in Anaheim for a long time. There's also an offer to extend it 20 more years, with the Ducks committing to keep Anaheim in the team name, something the Angels officials refused to do when negotiating with the city in 2019. This came from Councilman Jose Moreno, not to be confused with Arte Moreno, but
Right.
Jose
No
is not a
relation.
very right. Not a fan of the way that the Angels have handled themselves in
Yeah.
terms of dealing with the city. It's been a sore spot for the Angels, or for many of us here in Anaheim. We're thrilled that it's not even a negotiating point. The fact that the Ducks want to keep Anaheim in the name. They're
Yeah.
proud to be the Anaheim Ducks. Brings a lot of value to the market in terms of branding. We're looking forward to the construction and the important community asset that this will showcase to Anaheim and Orange County. World-class entertainment, local residents, visitors, and Anaheim Ducks fans, the Samuelis said in a statement after Tuesday's vote. Now, this comes off the heels of the FBI's corruption probe into City Hall that led the officials to canceling the $150 million Angels Stadium land deal back in May. Of course, the deal was put on hold and they put the kibosh on it, Mike. There's a kibosh.
Kibosh.
When they found out that former Mayor Harry Sadu was trying to get $1 million of campaign contributions from the Angels for pushing this sale through. Of course, Sadu has denied any wrongdoing. So that's a lot of information. Of course, they have this spectacular development happening.
Yeah.
But to me, it just screams, look at the difference between how the Angels handled things and how the Samuelis, who own the Ducks, are handling things. What are your thoughts about all this?
Well, Johnny, first of all, I talked to a Ducks fan today, and they said that the ownership group for the Ducks are phenomenal. Like, there has never been an issue. There hasn't been a struggle to get players. They've really done a great job. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but they've really done a great job of connecting to the OC area, the Anaheim area. It does feel like it is the opposite of how Arte and the Angels have handled the deal.
Yes.
And there seems to be a good relationship there. And you can tell that the tension is in things that can I just say it feels solvable? Like when Councilman Moreno says, the Angels wouldn't even talk about having Anaheim in the name. Like, that feels solvable to me, because if the Angels come to the city and say, dudes, we're making $20 million more because we have Los Angeles in our name or our branding or whatever it is, then I think that the city's going to go, oh, that makes sense. Like, what can we do to figure this out? Because remember, they were the Anaheim Angels and they were the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, and then they were just the Los Angeles Angels, and people made fun of us for all sorts of things. And then we go to other stadiums, and some stadiums actually still call us the Anaheim Angels. In fact, there was
umpires.
There was a replay, right? A replay, and an umpire said the Anaheim Angels are challenging the call on the field. So all of this to say, when you're working in business like this, you have to have a really keen eye and a posture of humility as you're working with the city, because the city has to vote and make all sorts of decisions on behalf of hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, right? And the Angels are just making decisions on their own. And I think that this is something that when we talk about new ownership, this is probably the first thing that needs to be reconciled and restored is the relationship with the city, because how long have we talked about this, John? How long have we discussed how the relationship is so contentious with the city of Anaheim, and that can't be good, right? I mean, we were talking just yesterday to Brent McGuire, and he was talking about how difficult it was to get his new brewery started in the city that he is in. And everybody knows when you work with a city, it can be hard to get permits, and they have this to do and that to do and jump through this hoop and jump through that hoop. And so you would think, just out of selfish reasons, the Angels would go, hey, let's just be nice and figure this out so that we can actually get what we want, right? Because ultimately, if you are nice and kind, you will probably get 80 to 90% of what you want. And if you need to sacrifice, which it sounds like the Samuelis have, they've sacrificed little things like having to lease the building or maybe extend the lease, right?
For big picture
it would make
stuff.
sense. It would make sense for owners to want to own the property and own the buildings. It would totally make sense to do that. But they haven't fought for that. And what's the result? The fans are excited. The city's excited. And now that area is going to be awesome. And what it really means is more money in our pockets immediately. And that seems to be the goal, even though they've approached it with like, we really want to make the city better. They're all going to benefit financially. So
Of course.
again, this is just the opposite of how Artie and his team, from a fan's perspective, have operated when they've worked with the city over the last really 20 years, Johnny.
Yeah, and to me, the Samuelis get it. They are investing in Anaheim. They care about the area. They care about the people there. You know, Steve Granado, former host of Locked On Angels, we had him on the other day. He said he loves the way that the Anaheim Ducks connect with the city and the people and the culture, and really make an investment to give back to the community and do some really great community connection events through the Ducks, and make them feel like it's an event when you go to a Ducks game. And that's something that's severely lacking from the Angels. And to me, Mike, it just screams selfishness, the fact that Arte Moreno, look, I know we've wanted him to sell the team for forever, but the fact that the land deal failed and they didn't get what they want, and all of a sudden he's selling the team. He wanted to make an investment here in Anaheim, but they couldn't do it above board. I don't know why. I don't know what circumstances took place to where they couldn't do it above board and make sure everything was going through the proper channels. And the fact that, you know, by all accounts, the FBI has signed a formal affidavit saying, yes, Harry Sadu tried to push this deal through in exchange for campaign donations.
Yeah.
And that's just not the way that you go about business, especially when everybody needs to benefit. To me, it just seems like Angels ownership, let me clarify, the ownership is really taking advantage of the city. The Angels have such a long history in Anaheim that it's very unfortunate that this is how ownership chooses to behave, because this is where the Angels are known for being. This is their hometown. This is, people wear their Angel hats with pride in Orange County because they love the team. And it's just unfortunate to me that there is such a disparity between how the Ducks, who clearly love the city and clearly love the people, and the Angels, who have just taken advantage of the city of Anaheim at every turn. I really think it's a shame.
Great points. And coming up on Locked On Angels, we've got a whole lot to talk about when it comes to a lawsuit that is being filed against the Angels. And does that lawsuit actually keep potential ownership groups from wanting to engage with the Angels, or maybe even hesitant to even purchase the Angels? We'll talk that through. But first, Locked On Angels is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info and the start, of course, of the NBA season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including the World Series. Who you betting on, Johnny? You betting on the Phillies? I know you're betting on the Phillies, right? Come on.
Man, it's got to be the Phillies.
It's got to be the Phillies. A Brandon Marsh home run. I'm going to put money down on another Brandon Marsh home run. And then you can check in on MMA and check in on boxing and even golf. Head to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
We want to thank you for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. And for your second listen today, you got to check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter the most, like the World Series games, to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports today is available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, as we talked about how the Ducks ownership group has interacted with the city, it's been the antithesis when it comes to Arte Moreno and how his team has operated, right? And so one of the tensions that they're wrestling through, in fact, two of the tensions they're wrestling through, is stadium maintenance, Johnny, and this fire station violation. So let me talk about Councilman Jose Moreno again. He's going to be a name you'll hear often on the show today. He wants to consider a strategy to enforce the Angels are meeting their maintenance obligations under their current lease. And whenever you have, I want to enforce a strategy, you know that the relationship is not healthy, right? And Anaheim wants to build a fire station on the stadium parking lot which is intended to accommodate the growth of the Platinum Triangle that John had talked about earlier. And it includes future development of what they're calling the OC vibe. Now, John, would you read from the voiceofoc.org? There's some specifics in that give us details as to what the tension is and what they're wrestling through when it comes to stadium maintenance and this fire station on the property.
Yeah, from voiceofoc.org, it said in a letter to the city, SRB Management, that's Arte Moreno's ownership group, their attorney, Alan Abshez, claims the city is in violation of their lease with a proposed fire station and that the city is only allowed to construct and operate certain structures in the parking lot, but not a fire station. I actually looked at their letter addressing the situation, and there is a clause that says a reasonable expectation of like peaceable enjoyment of baseball and baseball activities. And so they feel like a fire station is going to be disruptive of that. And so that's why they're arguing against this. Now, it doesn't end there, Mike, because the Angels also want $5 million from the city to cover the transaction costs and consultant fees, inspection fees, legal fees with the dead stadium deal. So now they want to recoup some of the money that they spent, and they want Anaheim to pay for it. And so it's just a frustrating situation all around. Now, here's more from OC or voiceofoc.org. They said, for years, Arte Moreno has said the stadium needs up to $150 million in upgrades and wants the city to help pay for it. An estimated cost from the team. In the last 20 years, the city has spent $12.3 million on the stadium, while the Angels have spent $54.5 million, according to a staff report. But between 2012 and 2019, the Angels spent $30 million on the stadium, but more than half of that money was used on items like the scoreboard and things to benefit the team rather than out-and-out maintenance. And when you go to Angel Stadium, you don't really notice anything too glaring. You notice the seats are a little worn. You go to the bathrooms and they definitely need some renovations in there. But again, it just tells me, the Angels are against this fire department thing, which I could understand maybe is something they weren't expecting the city of Anaheim to want to build on their property. But then to want to recoup that $5 million in legal fees for the now dead land deal. I mean, it really is just a matter of the blame game, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels like that, right? And I guess I would just say, like, can I just be repetitive? Like, this doesn't feel healthy. It doesn't feel good. Like, I mean, new ownership can't come in sooner because it just doesn't seem like the relationship between Arte and the city has really ever been good. Has it ever been good? I mean, we're looking back at, like, gosh, the numbers that are being thrown out there, 2012, 2013. I mean, these are almost 10, 15 years ago that we're talking about stuff where they have felt a lot of tension. And listen, we can bash on Arte and we can bash on the ownership group, but I can understand, like, if the deal for the stadium has fallen through based upon the mayor doing something kind of not above board, I can understand why they would want to recoup the $5 million. But if it makes it seem like, now that Artie's bailing, he's going to pull the ripcord and get out of there. I wonder if there was a better approach to that. Like, hey, could we use that $5 million that we've used for all of this stuff, and can we have the city invest it in the stadium, or can we have them do it in this way? But it just feels like conflict, and more conflict, right? And you mentioned Steve Granado when he was on the show. He had talked about how the stadium does need repairs. Like, it needs to be painted. It needs to be beautified. It doesn't look good. And I think that actually is a reflection of how much the Angel ownership has paid attention. I love the new scoreboards. I love the scoreboard in left field, and I love the huge one that they've redone in right field.
Those were much needed. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, they were very much needed. But I think that you also, you have a stadium that's been there for almost 60, 70 years, and it's going to need some love. And what the Dodgers have done is they've really loved Chavez Ravine in a way that it's become kind of an event to go to. And I think the Angels would like to do that. I guess what I just don't see is two organizations moving in the direction of each other, trying to make this thing work out. Again, to go back to our first segment, it just seems like the Ducks owners one, should probably be the people that buy the Angels if they have the resource to do it. But then
Right.
two, it just seems like they have a better understanding of how to work with the city, a different posture. And Artie's, he's a moneymaker, and I get it. He's a businessman. That's why he was able to buy the Angels. But I just don't see this. It feels arrogant. It feels immovable. It feels like it lacks humility. I mean, there's a lot here, but it's conflict, and it just doesn't seem like that's going to be healthy for the Angels currently. And then when we talk about the new ownership group coming in, what is the posture going to be? Is the city just going to go, finally, we can actually have a legit conversation, a calm conversation with the Angels? Because they're probably going to be on their heels because they're not going to be sure about what this new ownership group is going to be like. And if they're halfway kind, it could be better than how the Morenos have interacted with the city.
It's really a shame that, the talk went from, buddy between the Angels and the city of Anaheim and all of these future developments that they want to do. They want to make that area beautified. They want to put in some more apartments and housing and affordable housing and make it a destination spot. We've talked about how like Petco Park in the gas lamp district in San Diego was kind of the model for what the Angels and the city of Anaheim have wanted to do. And they're certainly moving forward with that for the Ducks and OC Vibe and what that's going to look like around the Honda Center. And of course, they want to do more of that around Angel Stadium as well eventually. But man, it just feels like Angels ownership is just burning so many bridges on the way out. And new ownership can't come soon enough because you can see it in the relationship with the city. You can see it in the relationship with the team, in players and the product that's being put on the field. It's just like they don't care anymore. They're just ready to cut and run.
Yeah.
And it's really frustrating as a fan, and it's really frustrating to associate the team that we all love and care about with all of these nonsense lawsuits and bad relationships. It just is really a shame to see. And it makes it hard as a fan. And I'm certainly sure it's hard for people living in Orange County and Anaheim to see this kind of relationship go south, but new ownership cannot arrive soon enough.
John, friend of the podcast, Jeff Fletcher from the OC
Yes.
Register had just released an article about the wrongful death lawsuit filed by the family of Tyler Skaggs against the Angels. And it has been scheduled for a 20-day jury trial starting a year from now. So October 2nd, 2023 in Orange County. There had been two civil lawsuits filed. One was in Texas, one was in California. The reason why is because, according to California law, it didn't allow the parents to be plaintiffs in a wrongful death suit if there's a spouse. And so the parents were plaintiffs in Texas, and Skaggs was the plaintiff. His widow, Carly, was the plaintiff in California. However, in May, the Angels agreed to allow the Skaggs parents to join the lawsuit in California. So the Texas lawsuit does go away, which, can I just pause for a moment and say, I know that this is really emotional and it's a loss of a player and all sorts of stuff have been connected to it. But that's the first, I think, like agreeable decision that I've heard the Angels make when it comes to their ownership group in anything, right? Like the fact that they would be like, yeah, we can move forward this way. So I will, affirm, hey, at least they did that. Now the family contends, and here's where the lawsuit gets kind of really interesting. The family contends that Tim Mead, who's the longtime vice president in charge of communications, that he was aware that Eric Kay and Tyler Skaggs were using drugs together. Now, remember, Eric Kay has now been sentenced to 20 plus years in prison, was found guilty. And it was because Eric Kay said some really nasty things about Tyler in prison. And so there was no remorse. So the Angels and Tim Mead have repeatedly denied that anybody knew anything about it. And this is why it's being brought up. There's questions of the Angels' liability. It breaks down to two different elements. So why don't you talk about that, John?
Yeah, there's two elements here. First, the Angels are liable for what Kay did within the scope of his job. And the team would argue back that they're clear in this regard because Kay's job description does not include him providing drugs to players. It's outside of his employment, and that's generally speaking a good argument because criminal acts generally aren't foreseeable when you're an employer, said Naima Rahmani, the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers and former federal prosecutor who now represents the plaintiffs in civil cases like the ones filed by the Skaggs family. The other half of the liability, though, involves the supervision of employees, regardless of their job descriptions. And Romani said the Skaggs family can try to show that the Angels are liable because someone who supervised K knew or should have known that he was distributing drugs to players. And so even though 5 players testified to the knowledge of both former Angels, that wouldn't be sufficient to prove the Angels management knew. However, it could be used as evidence that management should have known. So there's kind of a liability here in terms of, did you really not know that this was going on under your watch? The article continues, failure to have an oversight system, failure to make sure players are not involved in this opioid pandemic of sorts is something they're going to be held to. Barhoma said they have a duty to ensure against this kind of thing. This is someone who used to work for the Angels and was entangled with them for years. That's Eric K. Trying to say we didn't know. I don't know how far that's going to go. And we all know that they offered Eric K rehab. In fact, that was something that he took them up upon. So to know that he had an issue, send him to rehab, and then play dumb, I think is a little bit silly and does not bode well for Angels management. But Mike, I think the bigger picture here is, if this is going to go to trial next year, is that going to put any hesitation on a new owner to take up this mantle of the Angels? Perhaps it's something that the new ownership could settle outside of court before it even gets to that point. And the other thing I think that frustrates me as just an onlooker, somebody outside looking in, is the accountability going to fall to new ownership when the responsibility here is Arte Moreno and Tim Mead and the current regime? Are they going to pass the buck to the next owners in that regard? Those are the questions I have, but what are your thoughts?
I think a couple thoughts. First of all, let me go back to the statement that you read a couple of times. Should have known. And that's interesting because as a leader of an organization, there is the responsibility that you have, that you give in a job description, that you give in a cultural setting for every employee, right? But the should have knowns is an interesting ambiguous way of saying, yeah, of course, if somebody's breaking the law and you already are kind of aware that maybe they're doing something that has personally affected them by offering to send Eric K to rehab because you know that he's struggling with something, then I think that the question you have to ask, and maybe they didn't ask, but the question you have to ask is, how does this affect those around him? Is this just an Eric problem, or is it actually impacting the rest of the team? I mean, we heard in the court case, like Matt Harvey was somebody that was struggling with abuse and addiction, and other players as well. So this isn't something that I think was brand new to the Angels. Now, for new ownership, I wonder if because the lawsuit is towards this ownership group, specifically stating Tim Mead, I wonder if the responsibility then will be on the names that are listed currently and the ownership that is in charge at the time, because new ownership should not be penalized and new ownership should not pay out. New ownership should not have to do anything in regards to the Skaggs family. Now, if I'm the new owner, what I'm doing, and if I'm Arte Moreno, when Tyler Skaggs tragically passes away, is I'm approaching his wife, his widow, and I'm asking, hey, can we just take care of you? Right? Yeah. Can we give you a contract for $1 million a year for the next 30 years? You know what I mean? Like, can we just take care of you and your kids and your family? Because this happened on our watch. And I would feel a responsibility in the organization that I lead. If a spouse is suffering a loss because the person that they're married to works for me, and then there was something that happened tragically, I would feel a responsibility to take care of them. And I don't know what conversations have taken place, but if there is a wrongful death lawsuit and they're trying to get resource, it tells me that perhaps there are some conversations that needed to be had that actually didn't take place. And I think for Carly, there may have not been any sort of conversation about, man, we're sorry this happened, or we're so heartbroken this happened. It feels like they lawyered up before they could really reconcile a relationship here. And quite honestly, that doesn't look good. If we say that we didn't know and we're denying it, and then we go and we lawyer up, I know that they want to protect the resource and they want to protect the organization, but I do think that there are certain decisions and behaviors that you have to make, especially if you're innocent, in those moments where you go, what can we do to help? And quite honestly, I would not be surprised if this thing does get settled by the current ownership or by the new ownership as they come in. That could be a part of the process of the contracts that they sign, is that whatever the case is, whatever we buy the team for, we're going to deduct that from the total cost, and we're going to pay this out so that it doesn't come on you, but that we're not having to pull from our own pockets to pay for it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. You kind of wonder if it lowers the price in a way, the final price for the entire
Which
brand.
I know that sounds so, we're not trying to like sound so like
Of course.
disconnected from a human here, and this is
Right.
tragic, but I mean, that's all the stuff that they have to talk about, which is why I could never be a lawyer, you know, like, because you almost have to like talk about stuff as if the people are just a period on a piece of paper instead of actually a real human being, and you're dealing with all sorts of humans here.
Yeah, restitution needs to be made here, and I think the Angels need to make an effort with the Skaggs family. You and I have talked previously about, you know, what new ownership could do to amend that relationship and make it better, and, you know, possibly bring awareness to the opioid problem that's happening in our country, and do more in that regard. But I also saw in the article that just Tyler still had years on his contract that, you know, weren't paid out. And that's another part of this wrongful death suit. So I'm with you, man. I think current ownership needs to be held responsible. And then in regard to that, I think new ownership would serve them well to mend that relationship with the Skaggs family by supporting them, helping them out. And to be honest, I have to believe that when you are a player who suffered an injury like Skaggs and had to have Tommy John surgery, and of course there's medications and things you have to do to feel better as you're recovering, this could have all very started with the fact he had to have Tommy John surgery, which is an injury that occurred on, you know, in the workplace, and it's a workplace injury. And so if this addiction is stemming from the pills that he had to take and the painkillers he had to take to get through that Tommy John surgery, then I really think that the responsibility falls to the employers in the workplace where he was hurt. And it led to this addiction. It was, you know, of course, pervade and added to because of Eric Kay and his personal addictions as well. But I just really think this happened in your organization. You're all responsible. And I think that the Angels need to own up and take responsibility of everything that happened here.
Well, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen today. A lot of really heavy-duty stuff happening with the Halos, and we hope that things can get reconciled sooner rather than later with new ownership. And for your next listen, after you've listened to our show, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, because they share some of these big stories that we talked about today. They also share instant reactions, big game recaps, and their take of the day. And they'll talk about some of the things that are a lot of fun, but they'll also talk about some of the things that are not so fun. And you can check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We really appreciate you joining us today, and we want you to get at us on Twitter at Locked On Angels. You can follow the show there. You can follow Mike and I at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram. And Mike, we have ourselves a very special Monday because
it's Mailbag Monday, our favorite day of the week. You always bring all the great questions and have all the great statements. And so we would love to hear from you. You can tweet at us. You can send us a direct message. You can comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Of course, you can also do that on Instagram at Super Halo Bros. And if you call us, we can hear the sultry sounds of your voice at 714-409-6396. So give us a call, let us know where you're calling from, and then lay out your question, or maybe tell us what you think the Angels need to do this offseason. In fact, Johnny, wouldn't it be great to hear what some of the dreams of Angel fans would be when it comes to offseason decisions? But in regards of our conversation today, what would you like to see happen at Angel Stadium and around that area? What would be kind of the dream for you? Because if it's an event, more people are going to come, whether the Angels are good or not. But if it's an event, more people are coming, more money's coming in. I think that helps the Angels to be good. So all of that we'll discuss on Monday, Mailbag Monday on Locked On Angels.
We're looking forward to your questions and comments and getting to those on Monday's show. We hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Angels, and we will see you on Monday.